Look at us. Here we are.
We're here.
We're on is the podcast, the not a podcast, the information exchange. We have Ryan here to join us. Price is working hard, and so Ryan's joining Brad and I to talk about the Assistant Secretary for Technology Policy's annual meeting in Washington, D.C., which we sent the full crew. Sent it, as the kids say. What do we think? What are the big takeaways? What's the vibe?
Longtime listener, first time caller. Vibes are high. We sent the team in full force. I personally felt that, and this is quite often the case, I think, for conferences like this, the times outside the main sessions tend to be the most useful to me. I think we should talk about the sessions first, probably. Main thing I took away, and we could start maybe with the keynote, there's starting to be some enforcement, if you could call it that, when it comes to information blocking, or at least notices have been sent out.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say, I think that's the biggest pregnant pause, long comma in the entire thing. I mean, we've been waiting, but would love to see some names. Yeah, I definitely think we should circle back to info blocking, but keep going, Ryan.
Also, TEFCA is becoming more and more of a thing. I think they said 50 million record exchanges, which was
I thought it was more. I thought it was like 400 million now or something.
or maybe it's 500 million.
500 million and 70,000 participants. More than 70,000.
Hockey stick growth, perhaps, is what I think was termed.
This was always a thing at Epic where we would measure record exchange, and I think at some point that's not really the data point that's interesting. But for a new, well, I don't know how new we'd consider TEFCA, but for an up and coming network, I guess that still makes sense in terms of sharing. I'm interested how it all plays out with the health tech ecosystem, but it is good to know that exchange is happening there and that 70,000 organizations, I'm assuming that's, all of Athena coming on, like that big rise in terms of organization participation, I think is really just EHRs flipping the switch.
Let's take a step back. There may be listeners who are like, what is this conference? Who is this organization? I'm just going to lay some foundational pieces here. The ASTP, formerly known as the ONC, is the health technology regulator in the United States of America. They oversee the certification program, the voluntary certification program of EHRs. They oversee the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, the consortium, this health information network, the next era of health information network. They oversee information blocking. And so their authority is derived from the High-Tech Act, right? Establishing the certification program back in the early 2010s, then through meaningful use and the iterations there. The Cures Act reinvigorated and granted more jobs to be done and authority, although not money. They're an interesting fact here is that their funding has been basically the same through multiple administrations despite inflation. So props to them for figuring it out. At the start of the administration under Trump, people said, well, maybe we'll get rid of the certification program. Maybe we'll get rid of TEFCA. Maybe we'll get rid of the ASTP and roll it into CMS. All these kind of wild, wonky ideas. That has not proven true, as we saw. One of the things about this conference was the ASTP saying, we are still here. We are still doing our jobs. We are still going to advance health technology, perhaps more closely in alignment with the CMS. And so that is a broad meta takeaway of this conference happening, is that they are still here and they're still doing the jobs and the things that Congress delegated to them to do. Did you guys feel that as you wandered the halls of the Omni?
I think there's a lot of excitement around ASTP because they're good communicators. They've been very active in the last 2 months, which has created a lot of discourse. And it feels like there's a lot of anticipation for information blocking that Ryan, you mentioned earlier. There are two groups swimming really hard to modernize the health tech ecosystem. And so I think everybody's pretty excited about it. But you can feel anticipation, or maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm like, waiting to know what enforcement we'll see and what the impact of these CMS aligned networks, whether they're going to increase TAFCA participation and data exchange.
When you go to these conferences, you listen for the teasers and the nuggets, right? The nuggets are you listen and, Dr. Keene says something in between the lines. You're like, oh, that's HTI6 you just referenced. Or Michael Lipinski says something. You're like, oh, maybe that's action against so-and-so. There weren't very many nuggets compared to other events we've seen where the STP or CMS has participated in the past, right? The only nuggets were the kickoff and the things that Ryan alluded to about TEPCA's growth, about information blocking starting. Those were nuggets, but they were very planned nuggets versus, letting the government facade drop for 1 second by accident and alluding to what might come. There's a reason that doesn't happen very often. It's because they're not allowed to do that. People are fallible. Humans are fallible by nature, and it does happen. It did not really at this meeting, at least in my read. But there were teasers, I would say. The surprise insertion of the FTC, DOJ, OIG, ASTP joint panel to kick off the Information Blocking 201, where they laid down the different, overlaps of their authority, overlaps of their focus in terms of pro competition, anti, stopping anti-competitive behavior, stopping using the False Claims Act, right? They have different intersecting and overlapping and adjacencies when it comes to the laws they enforce. So reading between the lines there, the teaser was something along the lines of, please come to us with your anti-competitive behaviors that you're seeing on the market. And really, you can only imagine that they're directing that towards Epic, right? They didn't say it. They certainly wouldn't say anything, but it certainly alludes to an active investigation of some kind or attempt to investigate the largest electronic health record. As they talk about the market dominance of these software vendors, it's really hard to think of anyone else. And, we're guessing here about that, but it seems like a fairly informed guess given how it was structured. The other teaser I noticed was that they pointed very heavily to this session on day 2 that was about what's the future of technology and standards. And that had light ASTP hosting, but was largely industry groups like people from HL7, people from MITRE, people from Microsoft. And they spoke about several technologies: Fire subscriptions, CDS hooks, bulk Fire and bulk import, and then Coin and the conversational interoperability. The ASTP is pointing at these technologies, and we know that they're planning for HTI6 as this next regulatory pattern. It's hard not to imagine that those are the technologies that will be included or alluded to or asked about in the HTI6 proposed rule that we expect in the spring or summer. Again, teasers, but that's what we got. And I think that was slight disappointment. Such is life. I think the conference was definitely worth it from the perspective that you talked about, Ryan, of seeing everybody.
They were definitely all there. So, Brendan, you mentioned a few things there. Totally not for me, but more for our audience. Would you maybe explain some of the Coin conversational interoperability methodology?
And when Ryan says audience, he's talking about me.
It's myself as well. Let's be clear. But I would imagine from the list you shared there, Fire subscriptions, I think that's been around quite a while now. Definitely a very helpful technology. I would love to see that, in HTI6. Some of those newer methodologies, I kind of doubt we'll have a strict date, coming up here, but who knows? And I'd love just a quick high level overview of Coin.
Yeah. So Coin, previously called language first interoperability, is a very nascent new type of data exchange standard, but it's just like anything in this era. It's AI, baby. We got AI. And so if you imagine agent to agent interactions facilitating cross-organizational exchange, you can start to decouple what previously was, I have a payload in a certain format. I'm sending it over the wire and it's handled on either end in deterministic fashion, right? Like I need to have code that parses all the edge cases and handles it and knows what to do. And if I get a payload that I'm not familiar with, well, shit, we're out of luck. Language first interoperability Instead, if you have agents and sort of dumb pipes, you have agents that can handle sort of arbitrary payloads, language payloads, even back and forth, and use the tools, the APIs or other tools that they may have available to them in order to interact within their organization. And so much like I would call you, Ryan, and say like, hey, Ryan, I'm from so-and-so hospital, and you're working at the insurer, and we go back and forth negotiating, providing different information. You can imagine agents doing that. And that language first interoperability, that coin conversational interoperability is predicated on that. And that is really exciting, right? Like Josh Mandel from Microsoft did a cool demo in the summer where he showed how coin could really handle that prior authorization workflow very flexibly and very fast, in contrast to the sort of deterministic logic of the Da Vinci standard, where there's a lot of edge cases and a lot of ways that could just sort of fail. And so, not to say it'll be used for prior auth, not to say they even be in HTI 6. I think it's still so nascent that we don't know how it can best be used. But make no mistake that this is a standard we're going to hear a heck of a lot about going forward, and really could be the heir to FHIR, right? We continually reinvent.
Hopefully that's HL.
Well, the HL7's on board with it. HL7's getting excited by it. Like any good standards body, they want to sort of glom it on and pull it into their orbit. And we should be excited by it, because the big drawback of the previous eras of standards are the rigidity, right? The humans are flexible. I could say anything to you on this podcast and you'd find a way to respond. I don't know about what I'm trying to throw at you. I feel a little spicy today, but that being said, you're flexible. We can handle edge cases gracefully or semi-gracefully. Deterministic computers cannot. And so now with LLMs and agents, perhaps they can. Perhaps we can send the arbitrary PDF over the wire and they go, oh, whoa, what's that? Never seen that before, and figure out a way to handle it rather than just sort of bombing out.
I think pairing Coin with the Dr. AI pilot in Utah. I don't know if you guys made that session. 22 million consults, AI only reviewed on the back end. There was a 99.2% treatment accuracy rate, and they were able to drive 15-minute diagnoses and prescription renewals at crazy low costs. And it doesn't sound like they were pulling from an HIE or a nationwide network to understand the patient. From the presentation, it sounded like they were relying on the patient to provide background. And so, I mean, I needed to get a medication for a sinus infection last week and had to schedule an appointment, moved things around on my calendar, had a nice 3-minute conversation with an absolutely wonderful doctor, and went to go pick up the script, and everything's going great. But it's crazy to think about a world where a system understands my background, the pharmacies that I use, et cetera. And it's really, I mean, maybe I still need the 3-minute consult, but I don't have to do anything else around orchestration there.
It's a good segue that we didn't plan in our show notes, but we were going to talk most about the ASTP meeting, but the rise of AI doctors is upon us. It's upon us with the Utah pilot, which is just for, Doctronics, just doing refill requests, which are pretty simple in the grand scheme of things, but still is this like seminal moment of allowing a computer to make traditional license decisions. But there's been a horde of AI doctors released in the past couple of weeks that whether it's Verily Me or General Medicine, or I think there was one yesterday from like Function or somebody that's just a very, in a way that just wouldn't have flown in the last administration, but certainly is almost being endorsed by this administration as AI doctors. I think it's just interesting to think that, like, for some reason, the rise of LLMs, probabilistic computing, has given people enough comfort to look at this opaque user interface and say, yeah, that's good enough to make these decisions, whereas deterministic logic was not. And like, there's nothing as I go to these different websites to tell to me that this is an LLM behind the curtain versus deterministic logic behind the curtain. We're just trusting because we've seen how good ChatGPT and Claude and these different tools have become in every facet of our life. And we're now getting to this point where we say, well, it's that good at that. It's probably good enough to be a doctor and take on these doctor roles. And just as a sea change from the mentality. It's neither good nor bad. The audience can make their own morality decisions about it. It is just a fact of where we are in terms of different companies trying to release products of this vein, and the administration largely being supportive of that effort. What do you guys think? Do you want to be the morality police?
I think anything with AI right now, it's totally dependent on the scope of the workflow need. So you mentioned starting with refill authorization. I think there's not a lot of background data needed for the patient there. You, of course, want to check out the patient's allergies, those types of things. Um, but as you get higher in care complexity, I think those models will start to fail more and more. And that's where you'll need more of that expert provider mind to be behind it. And I think that's true across any industry that's implementing AI, is that the more entry level workflows, the more basic level tasks, those are easily accomplished by AI. And of course, over the years, we've seen it starts to go up a level, right? So we'll see more and more workflows start to happen. Maybe a basic office visit can start to be done virtually, and you're not even having an e-visit with a provider. You're just talking to an LLM. But I think as you get more and more complex in terms of your care, as you get a patient that's high in age and has a lot of chronic disease and things like that, it's more difficult to treat, and you need to understand more of their journey. And so you need interop to come into play there. You need to have a provider that's experienced that, but you'll see it start to be eaten away more and more as you go up complexity in workflow and as AI gets better and better.
The thing that I think is a little scary about this, and I'm going to pose this to Brad, is you have this bell curve for across the everything in life, and in this case, when you think about providers, there's providers that are very conservative in terms of their treatment care protocols on one end of the bell curve, and then the lower end, the ones that were fast and loose, potentially even fraud, and like potentially overprescribing for their own gain. And so when that was brick and mortar, the potential abuse that they could inflict on the population was regionalized and contained to some degree, right? If they got too big, they'd be noticed and they'd be thrown in jail. With the rise of telemedicine, we saw abuse, that same bell curve applied at a larger scale. And so you see things like the cerebral issues of the telemedicine era. Now that we have AI doctors, infinitely replicable, zero marginal cost computers that can prescribe and do things, if you apply the same principles of the bell curve, that one actor, one that is deterministically saying, "Yep, prescribe the ADHD meds or the other protected medications," could be scaled very, very quickly and do quite a bit of harm. So do you see that as a big risk factor?
I'm going to try and land a plane on Galaxy Brain this and make no sense, but I've had a concern. There is like a paternalism in me that looks at the early days of digital health where patients could need Viagra, just go on a website, put in my information. And some of those access patterns actually discourage patients from going and engaging with more necessary healthcare. Sure, we need to understand whether or not you have health risks to get Viagra or whatever the medication is. But if you feel like you've seen a doctor and you've talked to somebody about your health, but they're really focused on something narrow, we're going to miss tremendous opportunities to provide preventative care. And men do not access healthcare early and at the rate that we would like them to. And so I've always had a concern. I'm like, are we building a ticking time bomb by letting people avoid going to see a PCP? We also see a problem that there are a lot of medication classes. I came into healthcare through HIV care. And so a lot of my examples end up in that space. But there have been studies done that early on in the introduction of HIV prevention medication, wait times were really long because there weren't a lot of providers that wanted to prescribe the medication. And after patients made an appointment, typically 3+ months out to go see a provider and get on that medication, there was a higher rate of seroconversion because they felt like they were going to go make an effort to get on a medication to prevent HIV, but they couldn't get in for the appointment for so long. And I think these AI tools allow for that low acuity care to really quickly get patients life-saving medication. I also think, here's my Galaxy Brain jump back to ASTP, that a national provider directory allows us to get a lot more efficacy out of a patient saying, I'd like to get Viagra. And it's like, wonderful. We can fast track you towards that prescription, but we also can very quickly pull who's in network. We can identify, like, Brad, we have a really easy on ramp for you. It seems like you could talk to a behavioral health specialist, or it seems like you could talk to a cardiologist, and like, here's who's available for you. When somebody decides to engage with healthcare, whether it's at like a CVS to get a vaccine or on a website, the prevalence of data and the ability to use probabilistic systems to help patients navigate those pathways is all of my like worry about the ticking time bomb of keeping people out of care. We are taking away barriers that allow us to potentially get that patient to the exact right provider at the exact right time. And so I keep that optimism in me that technology is going to solve this, because I don't think I could get through our job on a day-by-day basis if I didn't believe that. And that excites me about AI doctors, or doctor like, whatever we should call them.
You landed the plane on that little island on the Pacific that has like the short runway. Yeah, you nailed it. Look, does the good outweigh the harm is the trade-off we must think about. And if there's a chance to activate patients in ways that we haven't before, engage them in the healthcare system and guide them to better outcomes when they're healthier and not sicker, we have to jump at that and learn from it. And I think the Utah pilot especially is just really well done in the sense that tightly guarded, bounded, clear escalation to real providers, clear learning and feedback loops, to not go full bore and do the full AI doctor, to not be Luddites. I just think that's the right paradigm of build the sandbox, learn from it, iterate, know the boundaries, build the rules, not from the ivory tower, but from the learnings on the ground in a very fast and iterative fashion. So got to support the government in this pursuit to try it and not just stick our heads in the ground, and also not to just, allow a lot of harm to be done by just fully deregulating.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you. And I had mentioned complexity of care and kind of the scope of the need. I think maybe not so much the complexity of care, but the workflow itself. So medication refill is a great one. Any more of the administrative workflows, I think we're very comfortable with anything that helps reduce the friction to get to the care. I hesitate to say the word friction when Brad's mentioned Viagra so many times. But getting to the care and making it as easy as possible for that patient to get connected with a provider, I think we're a lot more comfortable with in terms of AI taking away those workflows. The actual care itself and the sitting down with a provider or using telehealth with a provider, I think that's where I hesitate to see an AI bot taking over all of that.
Well put. Well, with that, we're coming up on the end of our 30 minutes. Been a pleasure to chat with you guys about everything. We're about to see the court cases from Henry Schein and Vine that they had their preliminary injunction. So trying to get my hands on those transcripts. We expect to see the closing of we're going to have the closing of the comment period for HTI5. So everyone listening, get your comments in. Get your comments in on USCI V7. Get your comments in on the AI RFI. Get your comments in on diagnostic imaging RFI. There's a lot of things to comment. And from that, I think we're going to see some cool action ahead on the regulatory front. So a bit of a lull, wow, around the Valentine's Day stretch. And here we're going to come into the end of winter strong. Into spring we go. So take it easy.